Chapter 1. The first confrontation in the vast prairies of the American West, where the sun scorched mercilessly over the dry grass, and the mountains rose like silent guardians on the horizon. Two worlds lived side by side, yet divided by an invisible wall of mistrust and old wounds. The year was 1875, and tensions between the native tribes and the newly arrived settlers had reached a boiling point. The Lakota tribe, led by the wise yet battle-ready Chief Red Stone, had seen their hunting grounds shrink more and more due to the white men's cattle drives and the gold rush that drew fortune seekers from the east. On the other side of the river lay the ranch owned by Jack Harlan, a hard-bitten cowboy who had clawed his way up from nothing. Jack was a man in his 40s, with a face marked by countless battles with weather, bandits, and wild beasts. His eyes were as sharp as a hawk's, and his revolver always rested ready at his side. Together with his crew of cowboys, tough men like Bill Bull Thompson, the burly blacksmith who preferred a hammer over a gun, and young Tom Riley, who dreamed of adventure but had yet to face the true face of war, they drove a herd of over 1,000 cattle toward the markets in the north. It all began on a hot afternoon when Jack's herd approached a narrow pass through a ravine. They had heard rumors of Lakota warriors patrolling the area, but Jack dismissed it as superstition. "They stick to theirs, we stick to ours," he muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. But suddenly, as if the earth itself had awakened, a low rumble was heard. It was hoofbeats, many of them echoing off the cliffs. From the ravine's edges they appeared, Lakota warriors on swift ponies, painted in war colors with feathers fluttering in the wind. Their leader was a young warrior named Swift Arrow, son of Chief Red Stone. His eyes burned with determination. He had sworn to protect his people's land from intruders. With bows drawn and lances ready, they charged down toward the herd. "Ambush, take cover," shouted Jack, drawing his revolver. The cowboys scattered, seeking shelter behind rocks and wagons. Shots rang through the air, and arrows whistled like angry bees. One of Jack's men, a newly recruited boy named Eddie, was struck in the shoulder and fell screaming from his horse. Bull Thompson answered with a blast from his shotgun, and a Lakota warrior tumbled from his pony. Chaos reigned. The cattle stampeded in panic, raising dust clouds like a wall between the fighters. Swift Arrow targeted Jack, who seemed to be the leader. He drew his bow and released an arrow that whizzed past Jack's ear, close enough to leave a gash on his cheek. Jack fired back, striking Swift Arrow's horse in the leg, sending the warrior crashing to the ground. With a roar, Swift Arrow rushed forward, wielding his tomahawk. Jack leapt from his horse and met him in brutal close combat. They rolled in the dust, trading blows and kicks. Jack's strength clashed with Swift Arrow's agility, the cowboy's fists against the warrior's sharp blade. Blood ran from both their wounds, but neither yielded. Meanwhile, the battle raged on around them. Tom Riley, the young cowboy, had hidden behind a wagon, but was forced out when a Lakota warrior approached. With trembling hands, he fired his pistol and, to his surprise, hit the warrior's arm, forcing him to retreat. Bill Thompson swung his hammer like a whirlwind, fending off two attackers before an arrow pierced his thigh. Chief Red Stone, observing from a hill, blew his horn to signal retreat. He saw that the fight would bring no victory today. The whites were too well armed, and losses on both sides would only lead to more bloodshed. The Lakota warriors pulled back, gathering their wounded and vanishing into the ravine's shadows. Jack and his men stood panting and bloodied. Eddie lay still, his wound serious but not fatal. "They'll be back," muttered Jack as he bandaged his cheek. "We've got to keep moving north, but we'll need reinforcements." At the Lakota camp, a few miles away, Swift Arrow sat by the fire with his people. His father, Chief Red Stone, sat silently, smoking his pipe. "The whites take our land bit by bit," Swift Arrow said angrily. "We must strike harder." Red Stone shook his head. "War brings only empty tippies. But we cannot let them pass unnoticed. We follow them and wait for the right moment." The following days were filled with tension. Jack's group moved slowly, burdened with wounded men and a restless herd after the panic. They knew the Lakota were shadowing them. Horse tracks marked the grass, and at night distant drums echoed like a threat. One evening by the campfire, Jack shared his past with his men. He had grown up in a poor family in Missouri, driven west by dreams of fortune. "I've killed to survive," he said grimly, "but this feels different. These Indians, they're fighting for their home." Tom Riley listened intently. He was only 19, dreaming of becoming a legend like Buffalo Bill. "Why do they hate us so?" he asked. "Because we're taking what's theirs," answered Bull Thompson, grimacing as he touched his wounded thigh. Meanwhile, in the Lakota camp, Swift Arrow told stories to his brothers. He spoke of old times when buffalo herds covered the prairies and their people lived in harmony with nature. "The whites bring their cows and fences, they destroy everything," he said, but deep inside, he felt a gnawing respect for the cowboy leader who had faced him in battle without flinching. The next morning, hell broke loose again. Jack's herd had reached a river crossing, and the Lakota lay in ambush by the shore. Arrows rained down, and the cowboys answered with bullets. This time the fight was fiercer. One of Jack's men was killed, and several Lakota fell. Swift Arrow and Jack clashed once more, this time on the riverbank. They wrestled in the water, the current tugging at their bodies. "This won't end until one of us is dead," shouted Swift Arrow in his own tongue, but Jack understood his intent. With one final effort, Jack forced Swift Arrow under the water, but instead of drowning him, he pulled him up and struck him unconscious with the butt of his revolver. "We'll take him prisoner," Jack called to his men. He could be valuable for negotiations. When the Lakota saw their leader captured, they retreated again. Redstone swore an oath to save his son, no matter the cost. With Swift Arrow tied to a wagon, Jack's group moved on. The warrior refused to speak, but his eyes followed every move. Tom Riley, guarding him, felt a mix of fear and curiosity. "Why do you attack us?" he asked one night. Swift Arrow, who understood some English from trading, answered shortly, "You take our land, we defend." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "We're just trying to survive like you." Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew. The Lakota followed at a distance, planning a rescue. One night, during a heavy rain, they struck. Arrows cut down guards, chaos erupted, and Swift Arrow was freed. But in the turmoil, Tom Riley was gravely wounded by an arrow to the chest. Instead of fleeing immediately, Swift Arrow saw the young cowboy lying there, bleeding. Something in him hesitated. He had seen Tom's kindness during captivity. With a quick move, he pulled the arrow out and bandaged the wound with his own cloth. "Go now," he whispered before vanishing into the night. Jack found Tom alive but weak. "He saved me," Tom murmured. "The Indian, he could have killed me, but he helped." Jack stared out into the rain, thoughtful. For the first time, a crack appeared in the wall of hatred. The fighting continued, but now with an undertone of respect. The Lakota no longer attacked blindly, they seemed to be waiting for something. Jack's men were exhausted, wounded, and hungry. The herd had dwindled after stampedes and raids. One day they reached a valley where a great buffalo herd grazed. It was the Lakota's sacred hunting grounds. Redstone knew the whites would try to hunt there, and he gathered his people for a final confrontation. When Jack's men approached, they were met by a wall of warriors. This time, the chief himself stood at the front. "This is our land," he shouted in English, learned from missionaries. Jack stepped forward, his hand on his revolver but not drawn. "We only want to pass. We have no wish for war." But the words were empty. The tension was thick in the air. Suddenly, a roar came from the mountains. An avalanche of rocks tumbled down, loosened by the rains of previous nights. Both sides fled in panic. In the chaos, Jack was separated from his men. He ended up alone in a cave, wounded by a falling stone. To his surprise, Swift Arrow appeared, also injured. They stared at each other, weapons ready, but neither attacked. Chapter 2, A Fragile Alliance. The first truce between Jack's cowboys and the Lakota tribe was like a thin thread stretched over an abyss. Distrust still hung heavy in the air, but necessity had forced them to sit around the same campfire. In the valley where the buffalo herds grazed, beneath a sky glowing red with sunset, Jack Harlan and Chief Redstone sat facing each other. Their men surrounded them, cowboys with hands close to their revolvers and Lakota warriors with taut bows, ready for the slightest sign of betrayal. And yet there was a silent agreement. No one wanted more bloodshed, not now. Jack chewed on a strip of dried meat offered by a young Lakota woman, Hawk's Wing. She was Swift Arrow's sister, her watchful eyes and graceful movements concealing her skill with a knife. "We have a common problem," Jack said, breaking the silence. "Bandits. They've heard about the gold in the mountains. They won't care if you're Indians or we're settlers. They'll take what they want." Redstone nodded slowly, his face carved like rock. "The white men with evil hearts have always been a threat, but why should we trust you, cowboy? You've taken our lands, driven away the buffalo." Jack met the chief's gaze. "I'm not saying we're saints, but I've seen enough death to know we gain nothing by fighting each other now. If the bandits come, they'll be hunting all of us." Swift Arrow, seated beside his father, cast a skeptical glance. His arm was bandaged after the cave fight, but his pride remained intact. "And what do we gain by fighting at your side? You'll turn on us once the danger is past." Tom Riley, still pale from his wound, spoke up. "Swift Arrow, you saved my life. I'm not one for big words, but I swear I won't forget it. If we're going to survive, we have to stick together." A murmur rippled through the camp. Some Lakota warriors muttered in disapproval, while Bull's deep laughter broke the tension. "The boy's right. I've knocked down enough outlaws to know they don't care who's in the way. We need every man and woman," he added with a nod toward Hawk's Wing. Redstone raised his hand for silence. "We will do this, but not for your sake, cowboy, for our people. If we are to share this valley, it will be on our terms." Jack nodded. "Agreed. We'll split the watch, protect the herd and your hunting grounds. If the bandits come, we face them together." The following days were marked by a fragile cooperation. The Lakota taught the cowboys how to track in the wild, follow the buffalo's movements, and avoid dangerous ravines. In return, Bull Thompson showed the Lakota how to build makeshift barricades from wagons and logs, and Tom shared his knowledge of rifle repair. Swift Arrow and Jack kept their distance, but their time together in the cave had planted a seed of respect. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it was direct and honest. One evening, as the stars lit the prairie sky, Hawk's Wing and Tom sat by the fire. She told him about the Lakota traditions, how the buffalo was more than food, it was part of their soul. Tom listened, fascinated, his boyish enthusiasm shining through. "Where I come from," he said, "we only have stories about cattle and saloons, but this feels bigger." Hawk's Wing smiled, though her eyes stayed guarded. "You are young, Tom Riley, but you have a heart that might understand." Meanwhile, Swift Arrow and Jack patrolled together at the camp's edge. They moved quietly, as if instinctively matching each other's rhythm. When they stopped to inspect tracks in the dirt, Swift Arrow pointed to the marks of unfamiliar horses. "Not ours," he said curtly. "Heavy shoes like yours." "Bandits," Jack muttered. "They're close." The tracks led to a ridge where they spotted movement in the distance, a group of perhaps 20 riders, heavily armed, sneaking through the night. Jack cursed under his breath. "That's Red Jackson's gang. They're like hyenas, striking wherever there's prey." Swift Arrow narrowed his eyes. "They come for your cattle and our people. We must warn the camp." They hurried back, and within an hour the camp was on high alert. Redstone and Jack drew up a plan. The Lakota would use their speed and knowledge of the terrain to lure the bandits into a trap, while the cowboys manned the barricades and struck with firepower. It was a risky strategy, but the alternative was being overrun. At dawn, Swift Arrow and a dozen Lakota warriors rode out to confront the bandits. They appeared like ghosts in the mist, loosing arrows and vanishing before Red Jackson's men could regroup. Frustrated and greedy, the bandits gave chase, straight into the valley where Jack's men lay in wait. The battle that followed was brutal. The bandits were seasoned and ruthless, but they weren't prepared for the Lakota's agility or the cowboys' resolve. Bull Thompson stood like a wall at the barricade, his hammer felling men like trees. Tom, despite his wound, fired his rifle with a precision he didn't know he possessed. Hawk's Wing threw knives from horseback, her movements like a dance. Swift Arrow and Jack fought side by side for the first time. When a bandit aimed a stick of dynamite at Jack, Swift Arrow hurled his spear, pinning the man's hand. Jack shot another who tried to strike Swift Arrow from behind. They exchanged a brief nod, no more was needed. But Red Jackson himself was a different kind of foe. A giant of a man, scarred across the face, With a sadistic glint in his eye, he charged straight at Redstone, who stood at the barricade with his ceremonial spear. "This is my land now, old man," Jackson roared, raising his revolver. Before he could fire, Hawkswing hurled a knife into his shoulder. He bellowed in pain but kept coming. Redstone met him with a force that defied his age, their clash a whirlwind of dust and blood. Jack and Swift Arrow rushed to help, but the chief raised a hand. "This is my fight." With a final surge, Redstone drove his spear through Jackson's chest. The outlaw leader fell, and his men, leaderless, fled in panic. The battle was over. The victory was bittersweet. 2 Lakota warriors and 1 cowboy lay dead, and many were wounded. But something had changed. When they buried their fallen, cowboys and Lakota stood side by side, not as enemies but as allies. Redstone spoke at the ceremony, his voice steady. "We have fought for our homes, and today we have seen that we can fight together." Jack replied, "We're not so different. We both want to protect what's ours." That night they shared another meal, but the mood was different. Laughter and stories flowed more freely. Tom and Hawkswing sat close together as he tried teaching her a card game, making her laugh at his clumsy explanations. Bull told boastful tales from his days as a blacksmith, while the Lakota warriors answered with stories of their ancestors' feats. Swift Arrow and Jack sat a little apart, sharing a bottle of whiskey Jack had saved. "You're a stubborn bastard," Jack said with a crooked grin. Swift Arrow laughed, for the first time Jack had seen. "You're not so bad yourself, cowboy," but peace was fragile. Rumors of more bandits reached the camp, and the gold rush kept drawing new threats. Jack's men began to wonder how long they could remain in the valley before conflicts flared again. The Lakota, too, worried. Their lands were still under threat from other settlers. One morning, Redstone called a meeting. "We have fought as brothers," he said, "but what do we do now? You cannot stay here forever, and we cannot leave our lands." Jack nodded. "We must find a way forward. Perhaps we can share the valley, your hunting grounds, our passage, but it requires trust." Swift Arrow rose. "Trust is not built on words. It is built on deeds. Let us prove it." They decided on a joint project. To build a bridge over the river, a symbol of their cooperation. The cowboys contributed tools and construction know-how, while the Lakota showed them how to use the local trees and stone. The work was hard, but it drew them closer. Tom and Hawkswing often worked side by side, their friendship deepening into something more, though neither dared to name it. As the bridge began to take shape, new tracks appeared. This time it wasn't bandits, but a troop of soldiers from Fort Laramie, led by a lieutenant named Carter. He had heard of the fighting and was determined to restore order. His arrival cast a new shadow over the fragile alliance. Carter demanded the Lakota leave the valley and that Jack's herd be moved immediately. "This is now federal land," he declared. "Neither of you has the right to be here." Redstone stood tall. "This has been our home since the beginning of time." "You have no power here." Jack, knowing the soldiers' brutality, tried to mediate. "Lieutenant, we have peace here, let us keep it." But Carter wasn't interested in negotiation. He gave them 3 days to leave the valley, or he would use force. Chapter 3, the bridge that bound them, the half-finished bridge over the river, stood as a symbol of the uncertain alliance that had formed between Jack's cowboys and the Lakota tribe. The logs were roughly hewn, the ropes that held them frayed but strong, just like the relationship between the two groups. The sun stood high over the valley, and sweat dripped from the men's brows as they worked side by side. Lakota warriors dragged heavy logs while the cowboys hammered and tied, their hands accustomed to different tasks, but united in a common goal. Yet Lieutenant Carter's ultimatum hung over them all like a heavy burden. 3 days to leave the valley or face the soldiers' weapons. Jack Harlan stood at the riverbank, wiping his hands on his dusty shirt. He glanced at Swift Arrow, who was fastening a beam with a rope tied with precision. "You're good at this," Jack said, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe you should be a rancher instead of a warrior." Swift Arrow snorted, but a small smile tugged at his lips. "And you should learn to ride without falling off, cowboy." The laughter that followed was brief, but it was the first time they had shared a moment of camaraderie without weapons between them. Redstone, watching the work from a hill, noticed it. His heart was heavy with worry for his people's future, but he also saw something new, a chance to build not just a bridge of wood, but a bridge of trust. Falcon's Wing and Tom Riley worked together on the other side of the bridge, where she showed him how to weave ropes from plants for extra strength. Tom, whose wounds still ached, grimaced, but did not complain. "You're tougher than most cowboys I know," he said, which made her laugh, a sound like ringing bells in the wind. "You're not so bad yourself, for a white boy," she replied, tossing her hair. Their friendship had blossomed during the days of shared labor, and their playful teasing masked a warmth they both felt but dared not admit. But the calm was deceptive. That evening, as the camp gathered to eat, a lone Lakota scout rode in at full speed. His horse was covered in mud, and his face pale with worry. "Soldiers," he gasped. "They're closer than we thought. They've set camp only a day's ride from here, and they have cannons." The murmuring around the fire fell silent. Bull Thompson tapped his hammer against the ground, a habit when he was nervous. "Cannons? That's not like fighting bandits." "They'll crush us." Redstone rose, his presence calming despite the threat. "We've faced worse enemies than men with cannons, but we cannot meet them in open battle. We must be cunning." Jack nodded. "Carter wants a quick victory. If we can delay him, maybe we can negotiate. But we need time, and we need the bridge finished." The plan they devised was bold and risky. The Lakota would use their knowledge of the land to mislead the soldiers, while the cowboys fortified the defenses around the valley. The bridge would be their last stronghold. If they could hold it, they could control the passage and force Carter into talks. But if the bridge fell, their hope for peace would be lost. The next day, the work intensified. Swift Arrow and his warriors rode out to lay false trails and lure the soldiers toward swampy ground where their cannons would bog down. Meanwhile, Jack led the construction of defensive lines around the bridge. Bull, using his smithing skills, reinforced the barricades with iron rails, while Tom and Falcon's Wing organized supplies, food, water, and ammunition. During a pause, Jack and Redstone sat to discuss the future. "If we survive this," Jack said, "what then? You want your land, we want our passage. Can we really share this valley?" Redstone smoked his pipe, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "My people have lived here for generations. But I see now that war will not give us back what we lost. Perhaps we can find a way, but it requires that you respect our traditions." Jack nodded. "And you must understand that we are not all like Carter. I just want to feed my herd and give my men a life." Their talk was cut short by shouts from the camp. Swift Arrow had returned, bloody but alive. "The soldiers are coming," he reported. "We led them into the swamp, but they are too many. They'll be here by dawn." Panic threatened to spread, but Redstone raised his voice. "We stand united. The bridge is our strength. We defend it or die trying." The night was frantic. Lakota and cowboys worked side by side to complete the bridge and strengthen the defenses. Falcon's Wing and Tom organized a group to hide women and children in a nearby cave, while Bull and his hammer built traps at the valley's entrances, sharp stakes hidden in the grass and ropes to trip horses. When dawn came, the cannon's thunder was heard in the distance. The soldiers, led by Lieutenant Carter, marched in formation, their blue uniforms like a wave against the valley. Carter rode at the front, his face hard and determined. He had no intention of negotiating. His orders were to clear the valley at any cost. The battle began with a rain of arrows from the Lakota hidden in the cliffs. The soldiers replied with rifle volleys, and the cannons fired their first shots, smashing into the barricades and sending splinters flying. Jack led the cowboys from the bridge, their revolvers and rifles spitting fire. Bull stood like a bear, throwing back soldiers who tried to climb the barricades. Swift Arrow and his warriors rode in circles, their ponies swift as the wind. They drew the soldiers apart, leaving them vulnerable. But Carter's cannons were a problem. A blast struck near the bridge, collapsing part of the structure. Tom cried out as a beam crushed his leg, but Falcon's Wing pulled him to safety. "We can't hold much longer," Jack shouted to Redstone, who fought by his side. The chief nodded. "Then we make it impossible for them to take the bridge." He gave a signal, and Lakota warriors lit fires at the valley's entrances, where they had hidden dry grass and twigs. Smoke rose quickly, blinding the soldiers and throwing them into chaos. In the haze of smoke and dust, Jack and Swift Arrow confronted Carter himself. The lieutenant had fought his way to the bridge, saber in one hand and revolver in the other. "You're doomed," he roared. "This land is ours now." Swift Arrow hurled his lance, but Carter ducked and fired. The bullet struck Swift Arrow's shoulder and he fell. Jack lunged forward, grappling with Carter and knocking the revolver from his hand. They rolled across the bridge, fists and blood mingling. At last, Jack gained the upper hand, pinning Carter against the railing and pressing a knife to his throat. "End this fight," Jack shouted. "Or you die here." Carter, breathless and bloodied, realized he was beaten. He raised his hands and his men, disoriented by the smoke and Lakota attacks, laid down their arms. When the dust settled, the bridge was still standing, though damaged. Losses were heavy. Several Lakota and cowboys lay dead, and many more were wounded. Swift Arrow, blood running from his shoulder, rose with Jack's help. "You're more stubborn than I thought," he muttered. Jack gave a faint smile. "Same goes for you." Carter and his men were taken prisoner, but Redstone refused to kill them. "We are not like you," he said. "You may live, but you will leave our valley." Carter, humiliated but alive, agreed to withdraw, but he warned them, "The army will not forget this. You've won a battle, but the war is not over." As the soldiers marched away, the Lakota and cowboys gathered around the bridge. It was damaged but repairable. Tom, limping but smiling, stood beside Falcon's Wing. "We did it," he said. "Together." Falcon's Wing nodded. "But it's not over. We must build stronger, not just the bridge, but ourselves." Redstone and Jack exchanged a look. They had won a victory, but at a high price. Still, their cooperation had shown what was possible. That night, they held a ceremony for the fallen, where the Lakota sang songs for their warriors and the cowboys offered silent prayers. The fire burned bright, and for the first time it felt as though they were not just allies of necessity, but something more. Swift Arrow, his shoulder bandaged, sat beside Jack. "We have bled together," he said. "That makes us brothers in some way," Jack nodded. "Brothers in battle, maybe we can be brothers in peace too." Chapter 4. A promise in the valley. After the battle against Lieutenant Carter's soldiers, the valley lay in a fragile stillness. The damaged bridge over the river was still a symbol of hope, but also a reminder of how fragile their newfound alliance was. Jack Harlan and his cowboys, together with Chief Redstone and the Lakota tribe, had won a victory, but the cost was high. The dead had been buried, and the wounded were cared for in the camp, where fires burned day and night to keep hope alive. But Carter's warning echoed in everyone's minds. The army would not give up so easily, and new settlers were on their way, drawn by rumors of gold and fertile land. Jack stood by the bridge one early morning, inspecting the damage caused by the cannons. The timber was cracked, but the structure held. Bull Thompson, whose thigh was still stiff from his wound, limped forward with a hammer in his hand. "We can fix this," he said, his voice as steady as ever, "but it'll take time, and that's something we don't have much of." Redstone joined them, his presence a calming force. "The bridge is more than wood and rope," he said. "It is a sign of what we can do together, but if we are to hold it, we must decide what we want, not just for today, but for the future." Jack nodded, though his thoughts were divided. His men were weary, their herd had dwindled after battles and stampedes, and many wondered if it was worth staying. At the same time, he could not ignore the bond that had begun to form with the Lakota. Swift Arrow, recovering from his shoulder wound, had proven to be an unexpected ally, and Tom Riley's friendship with Falcon's Wing suggested that something deeper was growing between their peoples. That day, they gathered to discuss the next step. The camp was a mix of tippies and wagons, a temporary union of two worlds. Redstone spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "My people have seen many winters, and we have learned that survival requires more than weapons. We must build a future where our children can hunt and live freely, but we cannot do it alone." Jack rose, his hat in his hand, as a sign of respect. "We came here to drive our herd to make a life. But I see now that we cannot do that by trampling over you. I propose an agreement. We share the valley. You keep your hunting grounds, we gain passage for our cattle. We protect each other from bandits and soldiers." The murmur that followed was mixed. Some Lakota warriors, especially an older man named Wolf Fang, were skeptical. "How can we trust the whites?" he asked. "They have broken every promise." Tom Riley, sitting beside Falcon's Wing, rose despite the pain in his leg. "I'm not much for speeches, but I know what Swift Arrow did for me. He saved my life. If that isn't worth trusting, then what is?" Falcon's Wing nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. "My people have lost much, but we have also seen courage in you. If we are to survive, we must dare to believe in one another." Swift Arrow, who had been silent, finally spoke. "I have fought against you, Jack Harlan, and I have fought beside you. I say we try, but if you betray us, my spear will find you." Jack met his gaze and held out his hand. "That's a promise, Swift Arrow. We will not betray you." The handshake between them, witnessed by both groups, was a moment that felt like a turning point. They decided to finish the bridge and create a shared settlement by the river, not a town, not a village, but a camp where both could live and work side by side. The Lakota would hunt and guard the land, while the cowboys would drive their cattle and contribute tools and trade. Work began immediately. The bridge was repaired through joint effort, and the Lakota taught the cowboys how to build structures that blended into the landscape, while Bull's blacksmith skills reinforced the bridge with iron. Tom and Falcon's Wing led a group that built simple huts for gatherings, and their laughter often echoed across the river as they teased each other. But the threat from the army and new settlers was never far away. One evening, a scout brought news. A larger force of soldiers, led by a major named Hargrove, was on the way. Unlike Carter, Hargrove was known for his ruthlessness. He had orders to clear the valley to make way for a railroad. With him followed a group of fortune seekers, greedy for gold and land. "We cannot face them in open battle," Redstone said by the fire that night. "They are too many, and their weapons too strong." Jack scratched his beard. "Then we'll have to be smarter. We use the valley against them, the swamp, the cliffs, the river, all of it, which you know better than anyone else." Swift Arrow smiled for the first time in days. "A trap, then. We lure them to the bridge, where we are strongest." The plan was simple but dangerous. The Lakota would lead Hargrove's forces into the valley by pretending to flee, while the cowboys hid by the bridge and in the cliffs. When the soldiers reached the bridge, they would strike from all sides, using smoke from fires and the terrain's obstacles to create confusion. It was a desperate plan, but they had no choice. The next day, Swift Arrow and his warriors rode out to meet the soldiers. They appeared in the distance, shouting and loosing arrows before disappearing into the woods. Hargrove, a man with cold confidence, took the bait and led his men into the valley. His cannons were pulled by mules, and his fortune seekers followed, their eyes glittering with greed. When the soldiers reached the river, the battle began. The Lakota emerged from the cliffs, their arrows precise and deadly. The cowboys, hidden behind barricades, opened fire with rifles and revolvers. Bull hurled a burning torch into a pile of dry grass, and smoke billowed up, blinding Hargrove's men. Jack and Swift Arrow fought together at the bridge, their movements now as synchronized as if they had trained for years. When a soldier tried to blow up the bridge with dynamite, Swift Arrow hurled his tomahawk and struck him down. Jack covered him, shooting 2 fortune seekers who tried to flank them. Falcon's Wing and Tom led a group protecting the camp, where the wounded and elderly had been hidden. When a group of fortune seekers tried to sneak through, Falcon's Wing threw a knife that struck a man in the leg, and Tom fired his rifle to drive the others back. "You're not so bad for a city boy," she said with a grin, and Tom blushed despite the chaos. But Hargrove was not Carter. He organized his men quickly, and the cannons began firing salvos at the bridge. An explosion struck nearby, and parts of the railing collapsed. Bull cried out as shrapnel hit his arm, but he kept fighting, his hammer a whirlwind of destruction. Redstone, leading from a hill, saw that they risked losing the bridge. He gave a signal, and the Lakota lit more fires, creating thick smoke that made it impossible for the soldiers to aim. In the confusion, Swift Arrow led a daring attack, seized one of the cannons, and turned it on Hargrove's own men. That was the turning point. The soldiers, disoriented and overwhelmed, began to retreat. Hargrove, furious but realizing he was beaten, blew his horn for withdrawal. The fortune seekers fled in panic, abandoning their spoils. When the smoke cleared, the bridge still stood, though barely. Losses were fewer this time, but the pain of the fallen was deeply felt. Jack and Swift Arrow, both bloodied and exhausted, leaned against each other at the bridge. "We did it again," Jack said hoarsely. Swift Arrow nodded. "But how many more battles can we endure?" That evening they gathered around the fire, not to celebrate, but to plan. Hargrove's retreat did not mean the army would give up. But something had changed. Cowboys and Lakota now looked at each other as more than temporary allies. Tom and Falcon's wings shared a blanket, their hands brushing together in the darkness. Bull, despite his wounds, joked with Lakota warriors about their shared love of strong drink. Redstone raised his pipe toward the sky. "We have built a bridge, not only across the river, but between us. Let us swear to protect it, whatever comes." Jack rose and held out his hand. "A promise, Chief. We stand together." Everyone around the fire, cowboys and Lakota alike, stood and placed their hands over Jack's and Redstone's. It was a moment of unity, a promise of a future where they could share the valley not as enemies, but as friends. Chapter 5. Friends for Life. The valley lay in a tense calm after the recent battle. The bridge over the river, now repaired and reinforced, stood as proof of what Jack Harlan's cowboys and the Lakota tribe could accomplish together. But the threat from the army, which the messenger had warned about, cast a long shadow over their future. A larger force, led by General Amos Thornton, was on its way, a man known for his iron hand and his contempt for both settlers and natives who stood in the way of the progress of civilization. With the railroad as his goal, he would not hesitate to crush everything in his path. Jack stood at the bridge, his gaze fixed on the horizon where dust would soon rise. Swift Arrow joined him, his shoulder still bandaged, but his posture straight. "They're coming with more men than we can count," he said. "Are you sure we can hold the bridge?" Jack shook his head, not in doubt but in determination. "We won't just hold the bridge, we'll hold our promise. We've bled together, Swift Arrow. That makes us more than allies." Swift Arrow nodded, and for the first time he extended his hand without hesitation. "Brothers, then." The handshake was brief but meaningful, a silent confirmation that their fates were now intertwined. Redstone, watching from the camp, felt a spark of hope. His people had fought for generations to protect their lands, but now he saw the chance to build something new, a future where they could live side by side with those who had once been enemies. The camp buzzed with activity. Bull Thompson, his arm wrapped but still strong, led the work of reinforcing the barricades. He had begun teaching the Lakota warriors how to forge simple weapons, and in return, they had shown him how to make arrows that flew straighter than any rifle shot. Tom Riley and Hawk's Wing organized supplies, their cooperation so smooth it seemed they had always worked together. When Tom fumbled with a bundle of ropes and Hawk's Wing laughed at him, it was clear their bond had grown into something more than friendship, even if neither dared say it aloud yet. Redstone called for a final meeting by the fire. "Thornton does not come to negotiate," he said. "He wants the valley, and he does not care whose lives he takes, but we have something he does not." This, he pointed at the people around the fire, Lakota and cowboys, united in common purpose. Jack stood. "We can't win by strength alone. We must use the valley, the bridge, everything we've learned together. If we can hold out long enough, maybe we can force him to listen." Their plan was the boldest yet. The Lakota would use their speed and knowledge of the terrain to split Thornton's forces, luring them into narrow passes where cannons were useless. The cowboys would hold the bridge, the only way into the valley, with everything they had. But the most important idea came from Hawk's Wing. They would send a delegation under a white flag to try to negotiate, not with Thornton, but with his subordinates, who might be persuaded to see their side. At dawn, the thunder of cannons echoed in the distance. Thornton's army was enormous, hundreds of soldiers, cannons pulled by oxen, and a horde of fortune seekers trailing behind in hopes of plunder. Swift Arrow led the Lakota warriors in a series of lightning-fast attacks, their ponies dancing among the rocks as arrows rained down on the soldiers. Thornton, a man of cold confidence, organized his men into formation, but the terrain made it hard to advance. At the bridge, Jack and Bull stood ready. The barricades were reinforced with stone and iron, and the cowboys had dug trenches for extra protection. As the soldiers approached, they opened fire, their rifles and revolvers echoing across the river. The Lakota appeared from the sides, hurling spears and vanishing before the soldiers could respond. The battle was brutal. Cannons struck the barricades, sending shards of wood and stone flying. Bull roared as he hurled back a soldier trying to climb over, his hammer a force of nature. Tom, at his side, fired with a precision he hadn't known he possessed, while Hawk's wing threw knives from a hidden position, her movements deadly and precise. Swift Arrow and Jack met in the chaos, their faces streaked with dust and blood. "They are too many," Swift Arrow shouted. "We can't hold the bridge forever." "Then we hold it long enough," Jack replied, firing his revolver at a soldier trying to light a stick of dynamite. Meanwhile, Redstone led the delegation under a white flag. He, together with 2 Lakota elders and a cowboy named Eddie, who had survived his wound from the first battle, approached Thornton's camp. The general met them with disdain, but his subordinates, especially a young captain named Ellis, listened. Redstone spoke with a voice that carried the weight of his people's history. "We do not want war. We want to live in peace, to share this valley. You have seen what we can do when we stand united. Do not force us to die for it." Ellis, who had seen too much death in his years as a soldier, hesitated. He knew Thornton would never bend, but he also saw that the valley was a trap. "I can't promise anything," he said, "but I will try to speak with him." Back at the bridge, the situation grew desperate. A cannon hit nearby, and part of the bridge collapsed. Tom cried out as a bullet struck his arm, but Hawk's wing dragged him to safety and bound the wound with swift hands. "You give up now, and I swear I'll chase you into the next life," she told him, making him smile through the pain. Redstone's delegation returned with mixed news. Ellis had agreed to try to negotiate, but Thornton remained unyielding. Then the unexpected happened. A group of Thornton's soldiers, tired of senseless killing, mutinied. Led by Ellis, they refused to continue the fight and turned their guns on their own cannons, destroying them in a chaos of explosions. Without cannons, and with his forces divided, Thornton realized he had lost. He blew the horn for retreat, and his men pulled back, leaving the fortune seekers to scatter in panic. The valley was theirs again, for now. When the dust settled, the Lakota and cowboys gathered at the bridge. The losses were heavy, but they had survived. Redstone and Jack stood side by side, their faces marked by exhaustion but also pride. "We held the bridge," Jack said, "and we kept our promise." Redstone nodded. "This is not the end, but it is a beginning." That night they held a ceremony, not only for the fallen, but to celebrate their unity. The Lakota sang songs of courage and hope, while the cowboys shared tales of their adventures. Tom and Hawk's wing sat close, their hands openly entwined now. Bull, his arm in a sling, laughed with Lakota warriors over a bottle of whiskey, while Swift Arrow and Jack exchanged silent nods, their respect now deeply rooted. In the days that followed, they rebuilt the valley. The bridge was repaired, and a small settlement began to take shape, tippies beside cabins, shared fires where stories were told. Redstone and Jack drafted a formal agreement. The Lakota would keep their hunting grounds, while the cowboys had passage for their cattle. They would protect each other from future threats, and a joint council chamber was built where both groups could resolve disputes. Tom and Hawk's wing, now open with their love, became a symbol of what was possible. They married in a ceremony that blended Lakota traditions with the cowboys' simple vows, and their first child would be born in the valley, a bridge between two worlds. Swift Arrow and Jack continued to lead their people, their friendship stronger than any weapon. When new settlers arrived, they were not met with war but with a display of unity, Lakota and cowboys, side by side, ready to defend their valley but also willing to share it with those who respected their ways. Years passed, and the valley became a place of peace, where children of both groups played together, where buffalo grazed beside cattle, and where the bridge stood as a monument to what could be accomplished when enemies became friends. Jack and Swift Arrow, now graying but strong, often sat by the river and remembered the days of battle and the promise that had brought them together. "We could have killed each other," Jack said one evening, his voice soft. Swift Arrow smiled. "But instead we saved each other. That's what friends do." Epilogue. Decades after the battles, the Valley of Hope stood as a beacon of peace in a troubled world. The bridge across the river, once a battlefield, was now a path for trade and friendship between the Lakota and the settlers. The children of Tom and Falcon's Wing ran laughing across the prairie, their lives a blending of two cultures. Jack Harlan and Swift Arrow, now older, sat by the fire sharing stories of the days when they had fought side by side. Their promise had endured, and the valley flourished as proof that trust could be built where hatred once reigned. Beneath the stars, the wind whispered their tale onward.